Shabbat Shalom for those of you who are joining us on YouTube. We did have some technical difficulties. I don't want to talk too much about that because I just want to get into the message. So, having said that, let's talk about some things. So, first of all, when you go into a feast day season and you experience the joys, the difficult personalities, interactions with people. It was my father actually who, when I was growing up, told me he hated Thanksgiving because it was the one day when everybody would get together and they would just all pretend to get along. And then a day later, they were already back at each other's throats. I think that was almost an exact quote. So when you come together, there's an element of getting along, not getting along, biting your tongue, etc., etc. But then there's the joys of the feast day. There's the excitement, the Seder meal, the raising of the loaves of Pentecost, the Sukkot, the Sukkah, the whole entire season of Sukkot. But one of the things that the rabbis kind of came up with is that when a feast day is done, it's done. Well, there's some interesting things about that, right? Because there's parts of us that don't want those feast days to end. We don't want the fellowship to end. We don't want the focus to end. But the Torah does something very interesting. The Torah takes its connection to Passover and its connection to Pentecost and contrasts them with a single word, which is leavened bread. The principle is that because there is unleavened bread listed, then you are only supposed to eat unleavened bread at Passover and during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. On the other hand, at Pentecost, you are to raise up on Shavuot, raise up 2 leavened loaves of bread. Torah says when the feast day is done, the feast day is done. Well, it's interesting because a lot of people don't want Sukkot to end. It's such an amazing experience. And you know what? I think that was true for me too. However, there's something very interesting about Sukkot. Sukkot has on its last day, the 8th day of the feast, what is known as Hoshana Rabbah, or the Great Salvation, or the Great Saving. And it's intriguing because the entire ceremony is made up of a bunch of different elements, but one of the elements in it is the rolling back of the scroll. Now, it's interesting because the scroll itself right now is very, very fat. I will show you. Now, last week, when we were looking at the scroll, this particular side here was very, very fat. And this particular side here was very skinny. But now it is reversed. The greater has become the lesser, and the lesser has become the greater. The minimum has become the maximum, and the maximum has become the minimum. There are elements of contrasting truth present in this concept. But as I rolled the scroll today and I passed by the different parashas that I know that are either indicated by a letter of some sort being larger or smaller, indicated by a poetic form and how it's stacked on the column in the scroll, or of course a huge space, which would indicate the actual beginning of a new book. And as I'm rolling past these and I'm looking at these, I'm realizing, because we didn't take the scroll with us up to Sukkot, so I had to roll the scroll today. There is a element of sadness. It was almost like, what did I miss? As I was rolling it and I was looking at it, I was like, what did I miss? What did I miss? It's interesting because the only question that God really asked me this week was, what did I miss? And so it's been on my heart. What did I miss at Sukkot? I missed something. Something was presented to me, spoken to me, something, and I missed it. And I feel like a lot of people feel like they missed it. Last night, as I went before the Father, I said, look, I don't really know what to say tomorrow because I feel like I missed it. And all of a sudden, it came into my mind. You know, this ministry began in very humble means, humble beginnings. 3 or 4 of us going to a church, that church then inviting people to explore their Hebrew roots on Saturday, other members beginning to show up, and then eventually us getting kicked out of the church, which then propelled me to begin to establish an internet footprint using Zoom, TikTok, and now YouTube. I don't have a lot of pizzazz when it comes to trying to present something to someone. But it's interesting because there have been times in my life when I have thought myself to be something and I was not. And there have been times in my life where I've been thought to not be something and I was. Now, what's intriguing about that is those are not opposites. In fact, the fatness and the skinniness of the scroll are not opposites. The opposite of comfort is not discomfort. The opposite of discomfort is not comfort. The opposite of freedom is not slavery. The opposite of slavery is not freedom. The opposite of anger is not happiness. The opposite of anger is not contentment. Each entity sits by itself. As I was trying to create contrasts, balances came. As I was trying to make it black and white, everything was gray. As I was trying to make things work in my mind to understand what I thought that I was seeing, there was confusion. When order seemed to present itself, there was chaos, but they are not opposites. Everybody has in their mind that the answer to certain things is opposites. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of sobriety is not addiction. There is a balance present that we have never really looked at because we've been trying to separate good and evil. When the truth is that although there was a tree that was forbidden to be eaten, the tree itself had the word yada, knowledge, which means the intimate integrating of good and evil. The Hebrew word yada, remember, Adam knew his wife, and she conceived. So I think it is important as we explore this that maybe we need to set some ground rules. This is Bereshit. Okay? This is Bereshit. That is the beginning. Remember, the fatness and the skinniness of the scroll are not opposites, but a balance. So as we move forward in this message, like I said, I think there's some ground rules that need to be established. The first of which is to understand that I don't consider myself to be somebody who has it all figured out. But from time to time, something comes along and it really surprises me and blows my mind. And this is one of them. Because it's so obvious, it's been on our face all this time. We have gone through things and did not realize it was present. I want to help you understand that as Sukkot begins to end, the scroll is rolled back. Why is the scroll rolled back in the fall? How come the scroll is not rolled back at Passover? Wouldn't it be better to begin the Torah portion at Passover? Wouldn't it be better to end the Torah portion at Passover? That's the beginning of months. Yahweh says, this is the beginning of months for you. In the 7th month, you will have the feast of Yom Kippur. In the 7th month, you will begin and end your Shemitah. In the 7th month, you will have Jubilee. The 7th month is about an equal distribution of justice, right? What is justice? Justice is an equal distribution of reward and consequence without merit, without bias, without partiality, without any mitigating or extenuating circumstances. As a result of that, what we have is we have the 7th month as being a very important month. The theory is that the Torah portions that were designed by, supposedly, by Ezra were actually processes to have the Torah read throughout the year so that when we arrived at Yom Kippur, we were without excuse. The principle is that after Yom Kippur, there are a series of readings about the holidays. There isn't actually a parasha. But then at the end of Sukkot, after the fall feasts, the scroll is rolled back, literally starting over. Now, there's some interesting things about that, right? I mean, like we could get into the whole thought process of new beginnings, a new year, putting on a new face, right? New Year's resolutions. But just like Thanksgiving, if you can't do it throughout the entire year, what makes you think you're just going to start now just because it's the new year? That's ridiculous. That's actually occultic. That's actually based upon the god Janus, who's a two-faced god, who says you can become renewed, right? That's not what we do. That's not what we do. So is this a time of turning over a new leaf? No. Is this a time of making new vows and commitments? No, you just at Yom Kippur renounced your vows. Don't start already making vows. Wait until at least July to make some vows, okay? The principle is that this is not about turning over a new leaf or beginning something new or trying to do better. You should have already been better. You see, in Hebrew thought, there is nothing significant about the calendar rolling over, except that there is in the Jubilee and in the Shemitah a releasing of slave, a releasing of debt, a returning of land. Other than that, life goes on, life continues, and we continue to be good Jews. But the principle is that there seems to be something very special about this parasha in conjunction with the specialness of Sukkot. And this parasha actually begins at the end of Sukkot. What I mean by that is that when we roll the scroll back, that next Shabbat begins the parasha. I roll the scroll back, and this is the first thing I see. Let me zoom in that for you. That's the first thing I see. The first thing I see is Bereshit. I see the big baits, right? I see the Hebrew and realize it's the beginning. Is it a new beginning? No, it's the same beginning. You go to Genesis chapter 1, there's nothing new about the print in that Bible. You go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it still says in the beginning. Okay? So when this says Bereshit, there's nothing Chodesh about it. There's nothing renewed about it. For example, when we say new covenant, we say Brit Chadasha. When we talk about a new month, we say Rosh Chodesh. There's nothing Chodesh about Bereshit. However, there is something different about the scroll, isn't it? There is. There is something different. That something that is different is the idea that there is a skinniness now to the right side of the scroll, and there is a largeness to the left side. What is that largeness? Potential. How do we know? Because there is never going to be enough brain activity in your mind to process everything that's written in this scroll. And that's only 5 books, and people think they've got the Bible figured out. You will gain wisdom over and over and over again. And today is no exception. Today, we are actually going to embark on something. Is it new? No, it's very, very old. It's just, relatively speaking, a recent discovery. One could argue that it has been under our noses the whole time. From the moment that you began to study ancient pictographic Hebrew, you've known it. From the moment that we have began to understand things and we've heard messages about Genesis chapter 1, we've known it. For those of us who have received revelation like I did back in 2014 concerning Genesis chapter 1, in which I was stuck in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, all the way to the end of the chapter for 10 years. Similar, another person in our congregation has received revelation concerning Genesis chapter 1. There are those who ask questions. Jeff Benner has his great insights concerning Genesis chapter 1, that it's in a poetic form and song form. One thing is connected to the other, etc., etc. All of those things are really beautiful. But at a time when I can safely say that I wondered if God was going to have us be in the parashas again this year, because I have found that there's times where we have gone through the parashas and we repeat the same discussion over and over and over again. My mentor, Yehoshua Natan, says, we're not using the parasha anymore. We can use the Haftarah, we can use the latter writings, we can use the what Marcion called the New Testament, but we cannot use Torah. Because why? Because people had gotten so used to having the same discussion over and over again. Every year we stop on Gershom and the circumcision. Every year we stop at the golden calf. Every year we talk about the back parts of God. Every year we talk about Genesis chapter 11. Every year we talk about God appearing to Abraham, etc., etc. Every year we do the same thing over and over again. So I was like, well, what are we this year going to do this? So two things that happen at the end of Sukkot every year. First of all, we roll the scroll. Second, we do the water ceremony. But we also acknowledge that that 8th day was the day in which there was a circumcision. That circumcision was of Yeshua. And of course, the 8th day of every child's birth is the circumcision, if it's a male child. So as a result of that, then we understand that the 8th day is also when there is the receiving of a name. There is a giving and a receiving of a name. Two reasons why this is important. First of all, it is important to understand for 7 days the child is without a name, but also on that 8th day when they receive the name and they receive their circumcision, then that is obviously when their character and potential begins, right? When they receive their name. Okay, so there are a few things that are very important here. First of which is, that means that if you were to receive a new name, it would be at the festival of Sukkot. At least that's what the congregation that Yehoshua Natan led. And that's where I got my name, Kinatavnu, is at Sukkot, at the Feast of Tabernacles. And so it is very important to me to understand that there is a giving of a name at that time. The reason why this is so important is because that means that we also have a theme each year of what the direction that I believe that the Ruach is going to lead us. This is something I also learned from my mentor, is that God will theme base his Torah portions each year. We will talk later about the theme some more. But the premise is that what we thought we understood about certain things, we have definitely in the past year learned that are not the case. As we've explored these things, obviously we've gained insights, we've learned new things, we've tried to understand things that we didn't understand, we've tried to do things that we could not do. But in that process, we've had some things under our nose that we did not realize were there. Remember earlier I said we're going to establish some ground rules. So here's a ground rule. You are more than welcome during this season to study the New Testament. But there's something you need to know. The translation into English is not coming from the native language that Yeshua spoke. The translation is coming from Koine Greek. Koine Greek is an ancient dialect of Greek. It is not used anymore. In fact, the grammar has almost completely changed in modern Greek. I've studied modern Greek versus Koine Greek. There's a difference. Why is it important? Well, because you need to be very careful about what you think Yeshua said. And you need to be very careful about what you think Paul said. Okay? Now, there are plenty of arguments for or against the idea that the New Testament was actually written in Greek. I am not here today to make that argument. What I am here today to do is establish some ground rules concerning the Greek. Two very important elements. Number one, the Septuagint, which was also written in Koine Greek, is actually a Jewish literary work in the sense that it was translated from Hebrew into Greek. But you need to understand how a Jew thought about a Gentile. And you need to understand the circumstances by which Jews translated Septuagint. You say, why? Because the same words that are used in the New Testament are used in the Old Testament in Septuagint. That doesn't necessarily jive with the actual Hebrew. In fact, there are so many discrepancies between the Septuagint and the Masoretic texts that until the Dead Sea Scrolls came along, the Masoretic texts were dismissed as having been tampered with by the Jews. Dead Sea Scrolls come along, and all of a sudden, Isaiah scroll is authenticated. All of a sudden, Torah is authenticated, finding only 9 discrepancies between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the and the Masoretic texts. Why is this important? Because when we are using Koine Greek to speak to us into English, we are skipping the Hebrew. There is a reason this is important. Now, there are a plethora of scholars who say that Yeshua spoke Aramaic. However, even in the Greek, it does not say that Paul or Yeshua were speaking in Aramaic, but instead they were speaking in Hebrew. Now, I realize that we have things like, for example, we have Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani in Aramaic, transliterated in the Greek, transliterated to the English. My God, why have you forsaken me? But in the Hebrew, it's Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. Okay, very different. The point being that the Hebrew to the Aramaic to the Greek is a transition that is outside of our vision. Why? Because we pick up an English Bible and just begin reading. You have no idea how important this is about to become. So, the first thing that we need to do is remember that one thing is not the opposite of another. Okay? I know when we're kids, we learn about sink and float, but the truth is that sinking is not the opposite of floating. I know that we learn about hard and soft, but the hard is not the opposite of soft. We have in our brains this black and white contrast of what is the opposite of something, when the truth is that each path has its own connection. So we have evil over here with a path, and we have good over here with a path, but they do not contrast each other. They do not contrast each other. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to talk about what governs a day. Okay, so I'm going to read you some texts. I will share my screen with you. Moving over into the convenience of a digital Bible in which I don't have to roll a scroll. And I am going to go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. And I'm going to do it in the NLT at this point. And then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness. When you hear that, you instantaneously think phos, the Greek phi, omicron, sigma, phos, translated into Latin, lux or lux. Okay. Translated into English, light. However, there is a problem. And that problem is that when we are looking at those things, none of those words are Hebrew. Now, there are things that we could do. We can go into the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible and we can look at what does this word actually mean. We're going to do that. But then we're going to take it a step further, and this is where we start to remove ourselves from the Greek influenced version of the Bible, which consequently is translated into English. Because why? We're American speaking, English speaking people. And if you're watching from somewhere around the world, you are hearing me speak English. Okay, so in that principle, let's go ahead and let's look at this part here. Then God said, let there be light. We will just go in and we're just going to pull out the word light. Whoops. That's not quite the direction I wanted to go. We're going to pull out the word light, okay? Now, this is Aleph, Vav, Resh, pronounced or.
Strong's H216, or.
Okay. And it is Strong's Concordance 216, H216. We'll go ahead and get that number and copy it. Jump over to our lexicon, Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible. And we are going to just put in our number. Of course, you have to remove the H because there is a there is an H and a G next to numbers, but the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible is just Hebrew. So there's no G and H behind the numbers that are in this book. Okay, so then as we jump over to our word, you'll see it's translated as light, right? Okay, pronounced or, to shine with intense light or be or give off light or be bright. Okay, now let's go over to our parent root. Here's our parent root. We know because it says PR. Here's our Hebrew. This is our parent root, and of course the Vav isn't there. And it says that the concrete is box. Now, for your sakes, I am going to also pull up the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible printed version, because the difference between the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible printed version and digital version is the amount of keywords present. So when I go in here, which consequently, for those of you who have the printed version, you can actually go look this up. It's going to be on page 58 of the book. And it says that the action is order. The concrete is box. And the abstract is unknown. Okay? So the reason why this is important is because I've highlighted order and box, because we've studied this before. We've looked at this before. So let's talk a minute about this. So first of all, I want you to notice something very, very important that I have often skipped over. And it is that the pictographic definition is not present. And we have never explored the pictographic definition. Why? Because this is intriguing in and of itself. Boxes are used to store items and keep them in order. Light is also necessary for order. Okay? So, when Jeff interprets this, what he's doing is he's looking at the understanding of how humans have interpreted this word into English. Okay, that's important. That's why it says look here, translated as light. Translated from what as light? Well, I will show you. Okay, so going back into this here and actually going to our verses. If we go to verse 4, and God saw that the light was good. Then he separated the light from the darkness. When we see this word light, we instantly think phos. Now, I know that you don't speak Greek, and if you do, that's different. But when I go into this verse, and I go down to the bottom of all of this, I have phos right there. Phos. Now, if we go to phos, then it is what? From an obsolete phao, to shine or make manifest, especially by rays. Phos, light emitted by a lamp. When I began this ministry, I preached a message. The night that I set up for that message, because I brought a bunch of DJ lights in to preach this message about light, about it being a pathway, about it being a guide, about it being all these things. The night I preached that message, God told me that we were going to be kicked out of the church. He told me that that was the last message I was going to preach in favor with the landlord. After that message, things were going to change. And that night, I was visited by some demonic characters representing themselves as something they were not. And I experienced a significant amount of resistance. The next day, when we preached the message, it went well. And we explained some things and we learned some things, and we touched upon the word or. We spoke about it a little bit, talked about that it actually meant order and that light is actually order. And we've had plenty of midrashes about quantum mechanics, and we've had all kinds of understandings about how light is a wave, or it's a particle, or maybe it's none of those things, right? Et cetera, et cetera. But that was the end of our favor up there. And that's what began what we have now today. But we've never touched upon phos. And I have, at that time, when I spoke that day up at the church, I did not speak of or, I spoke of phos. How so? Because I explained how the LEDs in my spotlights were actually light-emitting diodes, which was actually heat resistance glowing bright white. I was explaining how there was a resistance of electricity passing through a semiconductor, and it was heating up, and therefore it was, not a semiconductor, a non-conductor. And it was heating up, and as a result, it was producing photons. It was producing light. A detectable, scientifically measurable thing. Okay? So then my mind began to journey into, okay, well, what about like the menorah, right? This lamp, this oil lamp, right? It was oil. It was not candles like we light today. I mean, if you really wanted to get technical, we kind of went backwards. We in the 70s had some really cool oil lamps and all that. But as we've progressed with our technology, instead of returning to some semblance of the original light emitter, which would be the oil lamp, we have stuck with candles. Okay. Point being, we have this menorah. We light it on fire, and the heat produces light, right? The resistance produces light. And as that fire burns, as the fuel is consumed, the light is emitted. That's phos. That's phos. That's phos. That's light emitted from a candle. That's light emitted from a flame. That's phos. And I know I've done all kinds of teachings about the flames touching together, and I've explained a lot of things about light and about empty vessels and light going into them and all that kind of stuff. And we've always said the word light as in lux, phos. We've always said that these things that emit photons are the light. And when we hear that Yahweh separated the light from the darkness, we don't think about what those words mean. Because in our minds, all we think about is if I go into a dark closet, or if I'm out in the middle of the forest and there's no moonlight, and maybe you could see some stars, or how about maybe cloud cover, there is no light. You can't even see your hand in front of your face. Or you go into a closet and turn off the light. You have absolute darkness. So from that point of view, we think of darkness as being this blackness, right? We don't think about that this is not Greek. This is not Greek. When I say ground rules, it's important to understand that what I'm trying to say here is that you can no longer afford to look at this word the way that you looked at this word before and hear Yeshua's words. Okay? That's important. All right. So now, and of course, like I said, we have studied this. We know that the action of the word or is order, not as a noun, a verb, an action. The action is order. Order as an action is a little bit foreign to us because we think that order is setting things in a certain way, and that means that they are now findable later on, categorized, under our control. Even if we're to go with phos, the quantum mechanics of reality are presenting that light is actually very chaotic. And although chaos isn't necessarily the opposite of order, we do know that it is a balance of order. But again, order itself is another Greek thinking where we place something a certain way and now it's accessible later, or it is in sequence, or it is grouped with something. Ordering something is when we group a list of things together. When we order somebody, we are expecting them to move according to how we have given the instruction. That's phos. That's phos. So let's get out of phos. Real quick, we're going to just jump over to the lexicon. We'll just kind of walk through these a little bit here. So we have light bringer, which is aharon. We have this word arah, which means to collect, to accumulate, to add the amount, to gather up together. We have orah as a stall, a box for livestock. We have ori, which is a stall, a box for livestock. And then we have achron, which is the rigid rectangular receptacle, often with a cover, any box or object. By the way, that's the word for ark. Achron, okay? Then all of a sudden, out of the middle of nowhere, we just take this vav, we stick it in here, and all of a sudden it becomes phos. It becomes photons. To shine with intense light, be or give off light, to be bright. The illumination from the sun, moon, and stars, fire, candle, or other source. Now, let's just go back for a minute. This is no disrespect. This is no disrespect to Jeff, because one of the things he was doing is he's taking and he's putting these definitions into place in such a way as to augment or to help you understand what your English Bible is saying better. But you tell me, according to quantum mechanics, light does not behave. It is not in order. It does not have photon light wave versus particle physics does not honor the rules. In fact, it's broken the rules so much scientists are miffed. They are frustrated and confused, and so they're trying to create experiments to figure out all these different things. But you help me understand, what does a box have to do with light? What does order have to do with light? Honestly, there isn't. Guys, I'm not going to spin this. I'm not going to spin the word or into the word phos. I am not going to try to convince you that the word or has anything to do with particle photons. I'm also not going to try to convince you and help you understand that order has something to do with categorization, expectation, or accessibility. When we as humans say that someone is out of order, we are saying they're out of expectation, out of categorization, or out of accessibility. Okay? But you need to remember how the Hebrews think. And you need to think about how the Hebrews think, because they drew this pictograph in a very, very specific way. We're about to get into that. And this is going to be important, because I want you to remember something very, very, very relevant. And that is that if we were to go over here and we were to go into our verses, let's just go back to Genesis 1:3. And okay, before I do that, let me say this. When you're dealing with phos, so here's what you need to understand. Let's say that in the New Testament was written in Greek. then when Yeshua uses the word light, or Peter uses the word light, or Paul uses the word light, it's phos. And in the Latin Vulgate, lux, right? And in the Proto-Indo-European, luz, right? Or light. Okay. Coming into the English, that word is a very different thing. So if we accept that the verses were written in Hebrew, then that's one thing. But this is what I want you to see. And God called the light day and the darkness night. And the evening passed and the morning came, marking the first day. Okay, now, anybody who has been to Sunday school or has watched the videos that the Mormons put out, or has watched Veggie Tales, or who has seen the history of the world, or who has seen the history of the Bible, or any of those other movies from our time as children, knows that light is photons, knows that day is when the sun rises, and knows that night is when the sun sets, right? We always say it. We say good night. Why? Because the sun's gone. We've laid down. We're going to sleep. We say good morning. Why? Because the sun has risen. We say good day. Because why? Because the sun is up. But there's a problem here. And that problem is where a whole lot is about to change in your life. I don't know how to explain this, but this has been under our noses all this time. Okay? All right. Now, one point I want to make. Let's just really quick make this point. And God called the light day, right? He called the light day. Let's look here. And he called, and actually, let's go forward in line. And he called God the light day, and the darkness he called night, day. Let's take a look at that word. Okay. That word is Strong's Concordance number 3117, Yom. Let's go look in our lexicon at that word. Okay. Let's go look in our lexicon at that word. Now, I have told you guys over and over again that what we think we understand, we don't. And there has been often times where we have had to go back and really kind of let things go, let go of our biases, et cetera, et cetera. But this is what I want to show you. The word Yom, the parent root of Yom, is Yod Mem. Okay? Now, the pictograph definition for Yod Mem is the pictograph is a picture of a hand representing work. The Mem is a picture of water. Combined, these mean working water. The sea or other large body of water is a place of storms and heavy surf. This parent root is closely related to Mem Aleph, which we'll get to in a second. Okay, but a large body of water, also the direction of the Mediterranean Sea, right? The west. Why? Well, come on, you guys. We have seen that drawing over and over again, where I draw the sea, I draw the sun, I draw the guy looking out over the sea. He's afraid. Why? Because of the chaos of the sea. We know that Yod Mem is a work in chaos. A work in chaos. So when he says he called the light day, then what he's saying is it's a work in chaos. Light is a work in chaos. So how in the world is it order? Okay, now, as we go through this, obviously you're going, okay, so you should be by now going, okay, so day is not the sun leaving the horizon on the east side and going to the west side, and it's not the emission of the photons from the sun. Day is the separation of light from darkness. And day is not governed by the sun. How do we know? Because it's not until verse 13 that we get to the sun, moon, and stars. Now, this is going to become very, very important in a minute, because as we move through this, we already need to accept light is not order. We need to accept that order is an English word. The word or can't actually be translated, but the ancient Hebrews gave us a hint. And it is such an extraordinarily important hint that it's almost stupid. Okay? All right. So now, as we are going through this, the way that I want you to think is that a day is not governed by the sun. How do we know? Because of verse 6. Going into verse 6, it says, verse 5. God called the light day and the darkness night, and evening passed and morning came, marking the first day. And then look, verse 8. God called space sky, and evening passed and morning came, marking the second day. Okay? Then in verse 13, and evening passed and morning came, marking the third day. Then Yahweh said, let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Wait a minute. Hold the phone. Wasn't there already a separation? Didn't he already separate the day from night? Okay. Now look at this. In verse 6, it says he made two great lights, a larger one to govern the day and a smaller one to govern the night. He also made the stars. Okay. So we assume that these two great lights that govern are the sun and moon, right? But it doesn't actually say that. It doesn't say that's what governs the day and what governs the night. It does say he made the stars, but it doesn't say anything about them. It doesn't say what they do. However, he does say here, let lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night. Let them be signs, to mark the seasons, days, and years. Now, obviously, anybody with their salt in theology will conclude, worth their salt in theology, will conclude that this is obviously a construction of the cosmos as we know it today. We look up in the sky, we see that big bright orb, we see it affect the day, we see it affect the night. How does it affect the night? It goes away. It gets cold, right? Then the moon pops up and is a reflector, right? And then we have crazy things going on that have something to do with an indication that this is the sun and the moon and the stars. Why? Because it has to be for what? Feast days. It has to be for Moedim. That's the word seasons in the Hebrew. It has to be for Yomim, for days or works in chaos, and for years or Shanim, Shinun. Now, we're not going to get into the seasons, days, and years, but what I want you to see is it's a very easy to see how this could be translated this way, and it could present this way. What are we talking about here? We're talking about sundials, and we're talking about we're talking about calendars. We're talking about water clocks and their accuracy in Egypt as a result of the movement of the sun. We're talking about seasons we're talking about seasons where we have harvest or where we have a planting. We're talking about celebrations that occur during those harvests or the feast days, the Moedim, the appointed times. But again, you cannot take you cannot take Hebrew from the scroll, okay? You can't take Hebrew from this scroll and translate it into English. You can't. It is not that language. They're not compatible. There isn't an interface between them. I don't know how much the Jews who translated the Septuagint for the Gentiles did not put the ancient wisdom in it. But I do know that anthropologists and archaeologists who are discovering these Proto-Sinaitic potteries in the Middle East are finding these ancient pictographic Hebrew letters in pairs, the parent roots, and understanding that that's the Hebrew word that's being used in the scroll. The problem is that we're trusting the Septuagint to be a representative of that. So when it says in verse 3, phos, we think photon. Phos, that's where we get the word photon. Phos, okay? Now, I understand that up until now, we have really tried to reconcile those things. What do I mean by that? We've kind of accepted both. We've sat there and said, well, the creation itself was created in 7 days, and we can prove it. We've got all these different scientific things, and we're trying to make it a young earth, and we're trying to do all these things. Why? Because we do not want to accept the evolutionary theories because they're constructed by atheists who are trying to disprove God. And as scaredy cat Christians, we've done a very thorough job of not wanting to explore those sciences. And there's plenty of people who have been able to really, really, really bring an argument, right? Ken Ham, the Answers in Genesis, radio Bible broadcasting or whatever it's called, who puts out Our Daily Bread, puts out one similar to that. That's the Institute for Creation Research, et cetera, et cetera. All this time, we've been trying to reconcile science to the Bible. But the problem is that science is developed from ancient practices of which sciences are developed from ancient Greek cults who practice magic. The science of killing the body, antibiotics, killing the body, poisoning the body in order to enhance the immune system. It's alchemy, an ancient practice of sorcery. The science of the certain vitamins and vegetables helping the body is ancient practice of magic, of herbology. The apothecary would mix herbs together and make a potion, and you could drink it and you'd feel better. Of course you would. It's vitamin supplements. We have allowed this desire to reconcile science to the Bible to blind us to something even more powerful. So I think I've probably kept you on your seat enough, but I needed to lay some foundations. I needed to show you that the Greek cannot be the Hebrew and the English cannot be the Hebrew. And even though we see that the ancient Hebrew word aleph, resh, means box as its concrete and means order as its action, even Jeff was not willing to touch upon the actual ancient pictographic Hebrew letters. For those of you who know ancient Hebrew, or for those of you who are like to jump ahead, you probably have already concluded that there's something special about this word. For those of you who have already looked it up, amen. But there's more. So let's start with some very important things. First of all, when we are dealing with authority in ancient Hebrew understanding, we need to look at what the ancient tribal traditions or practices were. For example, what about swearing? Okay, so let's say that you are a servant of Abraham. You go to a certain group of people and say, I represent Abraham, and I want you to know that Abraham would like to buy, say, 5 sheep from you. And they say, okay. And they say, he will pay you back at shearing time with wool. The first set of wool is yours. And they say, well, how do we know he's not just going to take the sheep and go over to the other valley? And this is exactly what the servant would say. I swear in the name of Abraham, I will return wool to you at the time of shearing. In other words, swearing was in the name of the reputation of the person who had the authority. How was authority gained? You guys remember, if you can whoop me, then I am now your servant, and you have to protect me. Right? If you can beat me, I then lose my authority. You gain your authority, and I have no choice but to elevate you into a position of authority. That was the rule. And so as a result of that, and as a result of that principle, then we can understand that swearing in the name of something that Yeshua speaks about way, 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 way in the future was not something that was forbidden, but it was the idea of not swearing in such a way as to cause damage to yourself. Because the truth is that if that servant in the name of Abraham did not carry out those things, the servant would not be the one who was hunted down. Abraham would be. And Abraham would have to accept the chastisement, whatever that may be. That's just an example of authority. But let's go a step further. In the process of authority, we know that there are some representations. For example, the shepherd's crook was a symbol of authority. It was the presence of proof that the clan leader was boss. But the shepherd's crook was a representation of that because they were all shepherds and they knew what the culture of shepherding was. So we know that that shepherd's crook then now represents authority. Well, then all of a sudden we have something very interesting going on. In ancient anthropological studies and discussions in ancient manuscripts, cuneiform manuscripts from Sumer and Proto-Sinaitic pottery shows leaders wearing horns. Why? Because there was a belief that the horns of the ox were represented as strength, right? Because the ox was the strongest animal they had in their repertoire of information. What do I mean by that? They didn't have the elephant, right? They didn't have the buffalo. They didn't have some big old gorilla. They had oxen, right? And these oxen were huge, strong animals, beasts of burden, they were called. So when a person wore the horns upon their head, ram's horns, oxen horns, right? They were saying that they were the strongest. Well, what's interesting about that is the olive represents the strongest, and combined the olive and the lamed, we have El. Now, in a minute, I'm going to show you this on the board, okay? But the way I want you to think about it is this leader wearing these horns, okay, wears those horns to represent that they are the strongest. Okay, so an L was somebody who was a strong authority. So now we have the strongest person also having the shepherd's crook in their hand. As a result, making this very, very, very apparent statement. I am the strongest authority. Okay, now let's go look into the, let's go look on the board for a minute. So obviously, as we are going through this, one of the things that we want to do is take a look at this word first. And I apologize for my atrocious Hebrew. It is really hard to write with a finger on a whiteboard Hebrew. Okay, so this is the word El, right? The word El, and actually, let's see, let's do this. The word El means strong authority. Okay, the word El means strong authority. Now, the relevance here is that this is what? This is the drawing of the ox's head. Right? And this is what? This is the drawing of the shepherd crook. This is the word El. Now, Eloah is an oath taker. Okay, spelled like this. Eloah. Okay, oath taker. All right, now, so that is spelled like this. Eloah. 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 Now, if we add the work in chaos to the end of it, or the yod mem, this is our Hebrew word Elohim, which is oath takers. Okay, oath takers. I don't know why I'm having issues with my K's today on this board, but they're not connecting. Oath takers. Okay. Now, this word I will show you is the actual Hebrew word for God. That's translated into English, God, which again, we were just totally failing in our understanding of when we're dealing with this word. So I'm just going to jump right here into Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 in the forward in line. And we're jumping and looking at Elohim. Elohim, coming from the root word Eloah, right? Eloah. Probably a prolonged form of God, right? Okay. But when you go into this, we see godlike or godlike one, a mighty one, right? All of these have to do with the principle of this word right here. That's the word for God. Now, as we are going through this, then we understand that this is going to be, again, a translation of a translation of a translation. We'll go ahead and use that color for the word God that we understand. Now, I want you to think again. I want you to think. Number one, English will never translate from Hebrew. It won't. It's a different kind of people. It's a different kind of culture, and it's a different way of thinking. You have to learn to think like them. So this word does not work. Does not work. Now, I know this is probably going to ruffle some feathers because somewhere along the lines, we're going to have to accept that Elohim does not sit well as the word God. Okay. Now I know that there are people that are going to go, well, you just took creation away from God. No, I didn't. Because in Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7, he says, I, Yahweh, create good and evil, peace and light. Light and darkness, evil and shalom. Okay. Now, it is important in this process to understand that we are dealing more with the focal point of the clan leader, right? Oath taker is not a clan leader. That's not the title, clan leader. Because why? Anybody could take that oath, right? They have to do it in the name of something, but that's a whole nother trip. The reason why this is important is because when it says in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth, it is very important to understand that it says oath takers created the heavens and the earth. Now, I know that sounds off the wall, but what you need to think about is, what does an oath taker do? They are operating in authority. They are operating either in authority under jurisdiction, or they are operating in authority because of sovereignty. Sovereignty would be somebody who's at the top. Jurisdiction would be a subordinate who has authority. Okay? So in that principle, it is the power, as in the clout or the if you can whoop me philosophy, that is present in Elohim. Now, all of you know this. All of you have already seen this. All of you have already looked at this and said, okay, we will surrender that doesn't necessarily say God. We will say that Elohim could mean powers, right? Now, the reason why I wanted to show you Elohim is because of how the ox's head plays a role in the whole entire process. But obviously, we are not dealing with the word El. We're dealing with a very different word. So what I would like to do is we're going to go back to we're going to go back to some old stuff. Okay. So I will remind you that this Hebrew word here, chesh, ahin, okay, it means evil when the pictographs equate to a drawing of a human head and the drawing of a twisted rope. Okay. This is on pottery, folks. Okay. This is anthropologically and archaeologically proven. However, what do we know this is? This is the twisted head. Now, I want you to recall Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 39, where it says, and your children who up until now have not known good and evil, right? They will enter the promised land. And so we know that evil has something to do with your childhood. In fact, Yahweh says, man is evil. His head is twisted from childhood. Okay? It's right there in front of us that there is a problem with childhood programming that causes our brains and our minds to not, right? To not be functional. Because why? We know that this concept right here is also translated by Jeff Benner as dysfunction. Problem is that in all of that, we have come to accept good as function and evil as dysfunction. However, that's not the word that we were looking up for light, correct? We were looking at, let me see, let me shrink this down just a smidge and move it over just a smidge. Okay. All right. So we as scholars are seeking to understand Aleph, Resh, which Jeff did not even touch, which supposedly equals light. And definitely is explored or explained as an idea of order. But in the ancient Hebrew lexicon of the Bible, we have an issue. There is no translation of the pictographs. And what do we have in the pictographs? We have the lead ox. And we have the head. And what have we learned of the lead ox? What is represented in the lead ox? Well, a couple things that are important. The first one is that there is a concept that represented within each Hebrew letter is the words that the letters spell. Okay. But I'm going to do a little bit of proving of that. So this is, let's do this. Let's do another sheet and we're going to go with Aleph, Mem, Tav. Okay. Aleph, Mem, Tav. This is the word emet, right? Emet. Emet. And in the word emet, we have the lead ox, right? And then we have the water, and of course we have the X. Now, if you remove, if you remove the Aleph and we just have the Mem, Tav, this is the word death, met. Death. When it says, in dying you will die, it is this root word, which is what? A mark. Space that just a little bit more. A mark in chaos. That is the Hebrew word for death. A mark in chaos, or chaos mark. It's creating a definable beginning and end timeline. Okay? Now, there is a reason why this is relevant. Removing the ox's head, removing the strength from the equation takes emet from emet to met. So what is the word emet? Truth. So as you can see, the ox's head represents the authority of truth, shifting death into truth, right? Shifting death into truth. Now going back over here, then we can understand that this is a very, very, very important part of this parent root. Taking a hint from here, we now understand that this means strong mind. This is the word light. What do we know about this? What have we learned about this? The word light and the word and the concept of strong mind have been present in us for a while. But now I'm going to throw another wrench in the works. Up until now, we have had this idea of reconciling science into the process. But the mistake we've made is not understanding the ancient pictographic Hebrew representation of the ox's head being one of absolute authority. What makes the oath taker the oath taker? The horns. What makes the light, the horns. So I know that there is a concept here of phonics. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you pronounce the word or. And if Yeshua was speaking to the people, he'd say, you are this thing, right? Now, I'm going to share some things with you. On the fourth day, on the evening of the fourth day of Sukkot 2021, Yahweh showed me that the people who Yeshua was speaking to were not believers. Yeshua tells the crowd at the Sermon on the Mount. Now, let's move forward into the future. The people are now leaving the Sermon on the Mount. Yeshua has completed his speaking. They're walking away and they're saying, this man speaks with one of authority, not like our teachers. What does that tell me? That tells me, number one, that he said something there that touched a nerve that the teachers don't teach. Number two, that they didn't know who he was. They did not believe he was the Messiah at that time. They just believed he spoke with authority very differently. But I propose to you that speaking with authority has always been thought of that he just commanded his audience. But what if it was more what he was teaching? Okay. So he tells these non-believers, these Jews, that's another thing you need to keep in mind. These are Jews who speak Hebrew. The letter from Simon Bar Kokhba to the Masada that was discovered within the last few years was in Hebrew, not Aramaic. And so they understand that the Jews of the time of Yeshua spoke Hebrew, which means what? As he's standing before these people speaking to Jews, there may have been a Gentile or two present, but they did not have a clue. And if they understood Hebrew, then they were scholars of some weird following, because it just doesn't exist. A person who was not a Jew did not speak Hebrew. Meaning what? He was speaking to a crowd of Jews who did not believe he was the Messiah. That's Sukkot 2021 at the end of the fourth day. That's when I realized that when he says, you are the light of the world, he was telling the world that they were the light of the world. He was telling non-believers, people who did not even believe he was the Messiah, you are the light of the world. And of course, I have spoken a message about that being the order bringers, right? But now it just went to a whole nother level. Because why? Because we understand that there is something very, very significant about the strong mind. We understand that there is a process present in the world today of people swaying the will of the universe as a result of a few minds influencing a bunch of weak minds and the entire collective moving in a certain direction. and that being the heart of darkness. Literally, what we've got going on is people who can influence other people, and those influences then causing people to step away from the truth of who they are and what they've become. Now, the reason why this is very important is because when we look at the Aleph in the word Elohim, we don't think about anything other than that that's the intensification of all power in the universe that created everything, has sovereign will, and a sovereign process over our lives. But what's interesting is, I want you to think about what it takes. Okay, let me rephrase this. I want you to think about why people manipulate. I want you to think about why people who have weak minds are controlled by people who have strong minds. I propose to you that in that process, we have something present, and that is that there is a natural flow of things. And that natural flow of things works a certain way. You cannot see a tree develop into a piece of metal. It has a natural order process, photosynthesis, right? All of that stuff that goes into the energy creating process for a tree so that we can breathe. There are these natural order things as we have gone through this year and the year before, we have sought to understand the natural order processes of how things flow, but we have missed such an important fact that a work in chaos is done by the light, not the darkness. And we have missed a very, very important fact that equated to something greater than the darkness. Yeshua says, I am the way, the truth, and the light. He says, I am the resurrection and the life. And we have those roll off our tongues with our Christianese without even grasping the level of woe. Because he did. Look, Joshua looks at reality, okay? He looks at reality. He sees the photon maker, sun. Does he think of the photon maker as governing him? Does he think of the photon maker as having any type of authority whatsoever? No. How do we know? Sun, stand still. Now, Yeshua comes along. Disciples are in the boat. You know, everything's gone to crap. There's a crazy storm going on. And he comes along walking on the water, right? Comes along walking on the water. Peter gets out of the boat with him, walks on the water with him, starts to sink. You guys know the story. Boom, they get back in the boat. Yeshua says, shut up. And of course, then what? The disciples say, what man is this that even the weather obeys him? And what did Yeshua say? He said, don't marvel at this. Greater works will you do than this. It didn't bother anybody that Joshua made the sun stand still and that the moon stayed in its spot and the sun stayed in its spot. It doesn't bother anybody that when Isaiah offers Hezekiah a sign that everything's going to be okay and that God did not send the army against Jerusalem, he asks Hezekiah, what would you like to do? Would you like the sundial to move forward or to move backwards? And of course, Hezekiah goes, sundial already moves forward, moves backwards. So what happens? Sundial moves backwards. The sun moves in the sky backwards. Why? Because it has nothing to do with the word light in Hebrew. It has nothing to do with the word season in Hebrew. It has nothing to, that's the part that we're missing. So it's a play on words. But the principle is that, and when I say a play on words, what I mean is what I'm about to say. At the end of Sukkot, at the rolling of the scroll, at the beginning of the first parasha, we are naming this year the year of light. That's your theme this year, the year of light. However, it is not the English version of it. You'll remember it that way, year of light, because you think that the word or and shanim have something to do with years and with light. But this is or shana, the year of light. Okay? Now, it might be shana or, I have to figure out the grammar on it yet, but the principle is that we understand that or shana is not about a box. That was the concrete. And somehow the strong mind was considered a box. And light, the emission of photons, was equated to the revelation that was present in that box, was thought of as order, as in sequence bringing. Now, there's few reasons why this is important. The first of all, and this is the important one, is that the year of light, or Shana, is about understanding that strong mind. Yahweh is about to show you that he doesn't only speak the way that the Pentecostals taught you to hear him, where you have something laid upon your heart, but that he speaks through the energy. He speaks through the light present. And I am not talking about photons here, because somewhere along the lines, we're going to have to accept that what we've been trying to do is take all of our Western understanding, renegotiate an Eastern mystic book, and be effective. It is time to release your understanding of what you think that Bible says. It is time for you to understand that when they drew an Aleph and a Resh, they meant strong head or strong mind. And that's the word for light. That's the word for light. So I'm going to tell you right now what this equates to. We have in front of us a scroll. Okay? There's a thin side here. There's a thin side. What is this thin side? What happens to this thin side as we go through another year of revelation of Torah? Potential. This is what can be. Right here. What is this? This is what is. Okay? It's already written. The revelation we need, the understanding we need, all of the things that we need are in this potential for this to get thicker. As we go through these parashas, as we go through and we see these things in a very, very different understanding, Because one of the things you need to realize is that you do not start with a strong mind. It says that you are what? You are Ra from your childhood. You have a twisted mind from your childhood. Some of that twisted mind has to do with trauma. Some of that twisted mind has to do with neglect of needs. Amen. There is definitely a need to get that stuff undone. Why? Because of the way our brains record stuff, right? There needs to be a transforming, a renewing of the mind, which means what? Something's wrong. But the opposite of wrong is not right. The opposite of right is when your mind is transformed, you think differently. Doesn't mean you do right. You think differently. Now, in all of that process, it is important for you to realize that as revelation comes, it's going to come from the greater. Now, bear with me. When we look at this scroll, this is the lesser right here. That's the lesser. Okay? That's the lesser. This is the greater. That is where the revelation is coming from. That is where, year by year, we go through the parasha and we gain wisdom and understanding and knowledge and hope. What does that mean? That means that the future holds the revelation, not the past. That means that what you are going to become actually is the strong mind, not the past. You cannot look into the past and become the strong mind. You cannot live according to your memories. You have to live according to what you see in the future. The future self, the future you, the greatness. As I began this message today, I spoke about the idea that we have very humble beginnings. The only thing that I really have done, I mean, when I look back, there's two things that I said in my mind. I said, Grand Junction does not need another ministry. Grand Junction does not need another counseling center. Grand Junction does not need another Hebrew learning center. Grand Junction needs something very different, but what I didn't realize is that it was never about Grand Junction. So now I say, the internet does not need another YouTube channel. The internet does not need another TikTok channel. The internet does not need me to give a parasha explanation every week. The internet needs change. The people out there who look to the internet for information, who have sought to understand something by watching a YouTube video, they are the ones who are seeking change. They're trying to renew their minds, but the truth is that all we're doing is stuffing what? History down their throats from the point of view of what? Of what we want them to believe. When I say we, what I mean is that when we look at history, we look at it from the perspective of how it's written, how it's given to you. You go into the Bible and read an English version, you are not getting the experience that Yeshua offered. Now, there are some people whose toes I'm going to step on now because you have said, oh, I don't need to learn Hebrew. I don't need to learn the ancient languages because God has provided me with the English Bible. And that's what he gave to me. And that's who I am. I'm an American. Okay. Any attempt to live your life according to the intentions of Christ or of Yahweh, using the English version of the Bible is only going to get you an American experience. It's going to get you a Western Greek experience. It's going to get you phos, in which you are philosophically brighter, right? Be the light. You are going to philosophically manifest Christ. You're going to be a better person. When the Babylonians built the Tower of Babel, it was not called Babel. It was called Shinar. And when they began to build the tower, Yahweh sees them building this tower. He goes down. Why he descended in process, I don't know. But he goes down, sees them, says, they're all one. Oh, so it's about unity. They were all in agreement with each other, and that's why they were able to build the Tower of Babel. Problem number one. The intensification of all power in the universe is not a liar. And not only that, but he doesn't speak without knowing exactly what he's going to say. And he says, now, and this is what they endeavor to do. Now, nothing will be impossible for them. There's a lot of ways we could go about this. We could go and we could say historically nothing would be impossible for them because they had a huge number of people and therefore they had military power and they were getting stronger and now they were going to have this huge stronghold. Or we can accept that their minds and their energy, their power, and I'm not talking about authority. I'm talking the esoteric, metaphysical manifestation of energy within the body. Call it chi, call it ruach, call it, call it the Indian name for it, whatever. Call it electricity. It's energy. It's some sort of movement of supernatural substance within the body that seems to be under the control of the strong mind. There's something very observable that happened during Sukkot that I cannot deny and that I have to accept. And that is that there were 4 elements, of which 2 I can accept cleared up quickly. But there were 2 that were not that way. 2 injuries, 2 sicknesses. The injuries were healed almost instantaneously. Now, I can't speak for the other people, but for myself, I was going up the stairs into my camper during Sukkot, and all of a sudden, my lower back began to tighten up. It was so tight, I could not move. It was so tight that I could not fathom. In my mind, I'm going, okay, I'm not going to be able to help break down. I'm not going to be able to lift anything. I'm going to spend the rest of Sukkot in the camper alone by myself because everybody else is going to be out doing something and nobody's going to be in there with me whining and crabbing because my back hurts. Hands were laid on my back. And the practice of energy that we have explored over this past year was applied. And I went on a hike the next day. And that is the theme, that there were these little attacks or these little anomalies that interrupted our Sukkot, and were within hours or within minutes cleared up. I could even go in the realm of headaches. I could go in the realm of coughs, etc. Right? Don't get me wrong. There was still a reality present, and I'm not quite sure how to reconcile those yet. But my back did not hurt the next day, and I went on a pretty extraneous hike, to the extent where I had to help my mom down a hill and didn't want to go back up the trail. So my mom and I and some other people hiked up the trail. And as we're hiking up the trail, there's a point where mom decides that's far enough, and I will get back to that in a minute. But in that principle, so now I'm going to help my mom back down the mountain. As I'm helping my mom back down the mountain, I realized that I do not want to climb that trail again. And I want to be back with my people quickly. So I opt to just scale the mountain. The day before, I had a back injury. The day before, I was paralyzed to even move. And I'm running back up the hill. What I'm trying to say is, we have scratched the surface of this concept, but we have missed one of the more important elements, and that is that it somehow, and I cannot explain this, we will have to midrash it, we will have to study it out, but somehow the strong mind governs the day and the night. Now, it's not till Yeshua comes along. It's not till Yeshua comes along that there's some sort of definable understanding about it. He's commanding the weather. I mean, we see Joshua do his thing. We see Hezekiah do his thing, but Yeshua just walks around telling demons what to do, telling weather what to do, telling sicknesses what to do, and then says, you think that it's just me. But I'm here to show you the example. I'm here to show you the truth about who you are. There's a lot we could go into here, right? We could potentially step into the realm of the scripture in Psalm 82. You are all Elohim. We can step into the realm where it says we were made a little lower than Elohim, but that all of creation is under our feet. There's a natural flow of things, and one of them is light. We can see it throughout Scripture. Light just happens. Light just flows. But the problem is the whole time that we've been seeing the word light, we're actually seeing the word or. Now, there may be some exceptions. Sometimes it says Shemesh, which is the sun, right? Sometimes it says Lavana, the moon. Chodesh, new moon, right? But the same idea is present in this whole thing. And that idea is that from the beginning, this world, the first thing that Yahweh says comes into play. He says, let there be light. No, that's the English. Let there be a strong mind. And we can say box or we can say order. The problem is that the pictograph is the drawing of an ox's head, which was very, very, very prominent in that culture, and the drawing of human head. So we begin this Torah season with potential to learn, understand, begin to practice, perhaps master something amazing. Is it new? No. It's been known for a long time. Is it new to us? Yes, of course. Why? Because we refused to stay in the English. We wanted to see what Yeshua was saying. Remember when we spent all that time, almost a whole year preparing for the book of John. And what did we encounter? Ancient pictographic Hebrew, the ancient nomadic lifestyle, the not so Greek New Testament. Those things have been preparing us for this moment in which the word Aleph Resh, pronounced or, Aleph Vav Resh, pronounced or, was translated as light. But in the ancient pictographic Hebrew, it's the strong mind. I believe that the more that we open ourselves to understanding that everything that we thought we understood about Scripture is being stripped away layer by layer to where we are almost on the precipice of something absolutely amazing. We're scratching the surface. My back, the other things that happen in the camp, scratching the surface. There's something deep here that we need to understand. It is no coincidence that Yeshua comes in the 4,000th year, and that corresponds to the fourth day. And the fourth day is when the sun, moon, and stars come into play. But it doesn't say sun, moon, and stars. It says greater and lesser lights, greater and lesser strong minds, and the stars, which consequently is the chavodim, or the heavy things. So the greater, the lesser mind, those are present, right? And they're supposed to govern the night and the day. And we know that if they govern the day, they're governing the work in chaos. And if they're governing the night, then we need to understand what the word choshek means. Maybe that'll come up in Midrash. Maybe that'll come up in another teaching. But I think at this point, Yahweh is making it very clear that we need to let go of what we think we understand. Genesis chapter 1 is saying. And it's very possible that that's going to be the theme this whole year. But this is the year of light. This is Or Shana, the year of light. So I think as we go through this, there's 3 rules that we need to have. Number 1, we don't know. We actually don't know what we're encountering here. What I mean by that is what you think you have had or understood is wrong. Whether it be communication from God, whether it be the way in which you interact with the flow, or whether it be the actual power you have. You need to let go of the fact that this has been under your nose the whole time and you never saw it. And so I think it is important for us to recalibrate. I think it's important for us to approach this with humility. Yes, amen. But I think we need to go ahead and start as skinny as this scroll. We need to start as the lesser. And we need to submit to the fact that there's a greater out there. And we don't know what that is yet. And we need to accept that the revelation comes from the greater. And I don't even know what that means yet. Guys, this ministry seeks paths of righteousness. The paths have to bear fruit. If a path doesn't bear fruit, then we throw it out. And we will throw out even the most sacred of doctrines. We throw it out, and we seek to understand how to replace it. When we replace it, if that bears fruit, then we practice it. If by practicing it we bear fruit, then we teach others how to practice it. That is the model of this ministry. That is the intention of being after his heart. Do we have outreach? Sure. Do we have counseling? Sure. I don't understand how those integrate yet into this deeper stuff, but they do. Believe you me, they do. Look, even in the sense of timeline, we are looking at a God of the future. His prophets came and prophesied about the future, not the past. They didn't have much to say about the past, except that Israel did this and this and this and this, but they always spoke of the future. Yeshua spoke of the future. Why? Because the future version of you is so much better than the you now if you will be transformed. And that's the key here. But part of that transformation is accepting that you do not know. And if you sit here and try to adapt your culture and your learning all these years, or maybe a few years, to what I'm saying, you'll miss it. You'll miss it. When I was rolling through that scroll and I was wondering what I was missing, I'll tell you what I was missing. I was missing the change. I did not see that little scroll getting smaller and smaller and smaller. All I saw was the parashas going by. And all I saw was things that I wondered if I had missed. There are those of you in this congregation who will never get this, because you have a way in which you believe and you're set in it. We're not going to wait for you. Unfortunately, there was a point in time where the disciples could not wait for the other people to catch up. I want everyone to know this. But when Yeshua says, few they are who find it, and the kingdom of heaven is within you, there's just so much here, guys, that we have been wrong about. And so much here that we have got to make an adjustment on. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but we are going to move forward. If the Midrash starts to go in the direction of the physical, I'm going to shut it down. Science, I'm going to shut it down. It is time to move into something deeper. I want you to understand, I'm nobody special. I've not gained any more revelation than you have on this. I've just shown you what I saw and what I learned. When Yahweh asked me, probably about, 8 months ago, why is there a day and an evening? Or why is there a day and a night, an evening and a morning, and no sun? The depth of that is so important when you actually look at the word light. So I'm not even sure what a strong mind is, to be honest with you. I can tell you what it's not. You don't get somebody like, say, Donald Trump or Dale Carnegie or Robert Kiyosaki or any of these other guys that are just these, even Tony Robbins. You don't get these people coming along and being good at what they do, when really technically it's their parents who are good at what they do, and say that that's a strong mind. Is it influential? Yes, of course. But there's something spiritual about what they do that produces the strong mind. And that's the part that we need to understand. Need to understand how Yeshua spoke with authority, because I'm going to tell you what it's not. It's not some philosophical conclusion you need to come to in your brain. That's Christian creed. Not even Jews tolerate that junk. This is not about essentials. And if you're still caught up in whether something is a salvation issue or not, you're never going to get this. But what I do know is, from what I'm feeling in the Spirit, is that we need to start to pay attention to the flow a lot more than we did before. We need to let that be a guide. We need to open ourselves to that. When the pulpit told us not to open ourselves to that, we need to let the supernatural realm be our guide into the level and depth of this. Now, is Q going to go conjure some angels or demons? No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something even deeper than that. I am not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid of what I have to lose in order to gain this knowledge. I'm not afraid of what I have to forget, what adjustments I have to make to my brain. Why? Because the future me already knows that I made that decision. And I'm moving in that direction. And I want you to too. Or I want you to as well. So at the very least, you need to understand that the word light does not mean light. And when I say Or Shana, the year of light, this year, from this day forward to the next rolling of the scroll, which technically the rolling of the scroll occurred on the great day, but we didn't have the scroll up there. But the next time that we touch the word Bereshit again, which is about to roll into obscurity, it's about to roll into the backside of that scroll, and we will not see that word Bereshit again until next year. When we roll that scroll and that word is gone, when we see that word again, we will know something so amazing that we will look at Torah way different. We will look at the spirit of Torah way different. We will look at the spirit way different. We'll look at Elohim, God, way different. This is going to be an interesting year. I don't think it's going to necessarily be super hard or we're going to be under attack per se. But I do believe that there will be a desire to stay in your weak mind. I do. I do believe that you all are set in your ways, as am I. But I want to have the humility and the willingness to change. And hopefully my example will show you that as well. For those of you who are on YouTube, I will say Shabbat Shalom to you. And for those of you who are going to join us for the Midrash, amen. For those of you who have to go, I will also say Shabbat Shalom.